He once told her, "I'm not ready to be a father." Now the millionaire CEO would give everything just to meet his daughter. Matthew Anderson had spent his entire adult life building an empire he believed would protect him from all possible vulnerability. From the outside, he was the embodiment of success, a blonde-haired, blue-eyed visionary who had turned his sharp instincts into a global enterprise that dominated headlines and reshaped industries. He lived in a world of luxury hotels, private jets, and boardrooms where his word carried the weight of law. And to everyone around him, he seemed invincible. He thrived on the thrill of closing impossible deals, on the admiration in investors' eyes, and the fear that flickered in his rivals' expressions. Yet beneath the polished surface, Matthew carried a deep terror of one thing he couldn't control: intimacy that demanded more than he was willing to give. He could buy loyalty, he could command respect, but love was something he had never trusted, because love could break him apart in a way power never could. When Sophia Harper came into his life, she was unlike anyone he had ever known. With her soft brown hair and striking blue eyes, she didn't belong in the world of dazzling parties and calculated alliances. She was genuine in a way that disarmed him, unafraid to look past his wealth and reputation to see the man underneath. At first, he resisted her, pushing away the fluttering feeling in his chest whenever she laughed, telling himself she was nothing but a distraction. But her presence persisted, seeping into the quiet spaces of his life where ambition had once been enough. She made his penthouse feel less like a museum and more like a home. And for the first time, Matthew allowed himself to believe that maybe he could have both the empire he had built and the warmth of a woman who cared for him, not because of his fortune, but in spite of it. It all fell apart the night she told him she was pregnant. They were sitting in his living room, the city lights spilling through the great windows, the noise of Manhattan far below. Sophia's voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she told him, her blue eyes searching his face for reassurance. Instead of joy, Matthew felt a surge of panic rise in his chest. The walls he had carefully built to keep his life in order seemed to be collapsing all around him, replaced by a suffocating fear of responsibility, vulnerability, and a loss of control. A child wasn't part of the plan. A child was chaos, permanence, and a bond he couldn't break without consequence. He stood from the couch and turned his back to her, staring out at the skyline, as if the answer could be found in the glittering lights. She called his name softly, but he couldn't bring himself to look at her. The image of boardroom battles, of investors whispering about his personal life, of scandal headlines that threatened the empire he had fought for, it all filled his mind. When he finally turned around, his expression was cold, his voice steady, though he was twisted with conflict inside. "I'm not ready to be a father," he said, the words heavy with finality. Sophia stared at him, her lips parted as if she couldn't comprehend what he had just said. She had expected fear, maybe even anger, but not this cold rejection, not this brutal dismissal. She had thought he would take her hand, that he would remember the nights he had held her and whispered that she was the only one who had truly seen him. Instead, he had broken their bond with a single sentence. Tears welled in her eyes, but she held them back, her chin lifted with a quiet strength. Without another word, she picked up her purse and walked to the door, her footsteps echoing through the cavernous apartment. Matthew stood frozen, his chest constricting with a pain he refused to name. He could have stopped her. He could have reached for her, but pride and fear rooted him in place. The door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded louder than any slam. He told himself he had done the right thing, that he had protected his empire, that he had prevented a disaster. Yet as the silence closed in around him, he felt an emptiness settle in his chest. one that he would carry with him for years to come. He poured himself a drink and stared at the city, convincing himself she would forget him, that she would move on, that he had made a clean break. What he couldn't admit, what he wouldn't allow himself to see, was that he had just lost something no empire could ever replace. A new life in a small town. Sophia walked away from Matthew's penthouse with tears blurring her vision, but she refused to turn back. The echo of his words, "I'm not ready to be a father," rang in her ears with every step she took down the cold marble hallway. And though her heart shattered, she clutched her stomach as if to remind herself that she was no longer alone. She told herself she had to be strong, not for him, but for the life inside her. In that moment, she chose survival over despair, and though she would spend many nights crying into her pillow, the seed of determination had already taken root in her. Within a matter of days, she packed her belongings, left behind the glittering chaos of New York, and moved to a small town several hours away, a place where the skyline gave way to quiet streets, and people greeted each other by name. The pregnancy tested her in ways she could never have imagined. She faced mornings where nausea kept her doubled over, afternoons where loneliness gnawed at her, and endless worries about how she would provide for a child alone with a modest savings account and a heart heavy with betrayal. Yet each time she heard the heartbeat at doctor's appointments, each time she felt a small kick within her body, her resolve strengthened. She told herself over and over that love was stronger than money, that she would give her daughter a life filled with security, even if it meant sacrifice. She worked long shifts as a substitute teacher, and when her body grew too weary, she took on tutoring jobs from home, earning just enough to get by. The day Lily was born, Sophia felt her world transform. The labor was long and exhausting, and when the doctor finally placed a small, blonde baby with bright blue eyes in her arms, Sophia broke down in tears of joy. Lily looked like an angel, her soft golden hair shining under the hospital lights, her eyes so clear and blue they seemed to pierce Sophia's soul. Holding her daughter for the first time, she felt an overwhelming surge of love that washed away the pain of Matthew's rejection. She whispered promises into the newborn's ear, vowing she would never make her feel unwanted, that she would fight for her no matter how hard life became, and that she would raise her to know her worth. The first year was grueling. Sophia learned quickly that single motherhood was both the greatest blessing and the most relentless test of endurance. She spent nights pacing the floor with Lily in her arms, rocking her back and forth until exhaustion blurred the edges of her vision. She woke up early to prepare bottles, to soothe cries, and to go to work with heavy eyes, surviving on pure willpower. Money was always tight, and there were times she had to choose between paying rent or buying something extra for her baby. She sacrificed meals, wore the same clothes year after year, and turned away all luxuries. Yet none of it mattered when Lily looked up at her with those blue eyes and smiled, a smile so radiant it made every struggle feel worthwhile. As the years passed, Sophia built a modest but stable life. She became a permanent teacher at a local elementary school, balancing her career with the constant needs of a growing child. She painted Lily's room with her own two hands, making it a bright haven filled with hand-me-down toys and second-hand books. She sewed torn clothes, learned to cook simple meals from scratch, and filled her small apartment with laughter in spite of the absence of luxury. Lily grew into a curious and kind-hearted girl, her laughter echoing through the halls, her small hands grasping Sophia's every time she felt shy or scared. The people in the town adored her, often commenting on her brilliant blue eyes that seemed unusual against Sophia's brown hair. Sophia would just smile and say nothing, though deep down she knew exactly where those eyes came from. Still, no matter how full her days became, the nights were harder. In the quiet after Lily had fallen asleep, Sophia would often sit by the window, staring out at the moon and letting her thoughts drift to Matthew. She wondered if he ever thought of her, if he regretted his words, if he ever pictured the daughter he had never met. Sometimes anger would flare in her chest, reminding her how he had abandoned them, how he had chosen pride and fear over love. But other times sadness would creep in, a soft, unwelcome ache for the man she had once believed in, for the life they could have built if he had only chosen differently. She hated that a part of her still longed for what they could never have, but she never allowed herself to drown in those thoughts. She had Lily now, and that was enough. By the time Lily turned 5, Sophia had accepted that this was her life. Modest, quiet, filled with challenges, but also full of love. She no longer expected Matthew to reappear. She told herself she had forgotten him, that his absence was nothing but a closed chapter in a book she no longer needed to read. She poured all her love and energy into her daughter, who was becoming a reflection of everything Sophia had dreamed of raising: compassionate, intelligent, and full of light. What Sophia didn't know, what she couldn't have prepared for, was that fate had its own plans. The past she believed she had left behind was not done with her, and the man who had once broken her heart was about to return in a way that would shake the fragile world she had built. A reunion that changes everything. Matthew Anderson continued to move through life as if nothing had ever touched him, at least to the world's eye. He was celebrated as one of the most brilliant young CEOs of his generation, the golden boy of business who could turn any venture into a success. Magazines displayed his chiseled face and penetrating blue eyes on their covers, labeling him a visionary, while articles praised his audacious moves in the corporate sphere. His days were filled with meetings in glass-walled skyscrapers, phone calls that moved millions of dollars with a single word, and late-night parties where the champagne never stopped flowing. On the surface, he seemed untouchable, a man who had sacrificed everything for ambition and had won. But when the lights went down and the applause faded, the silence of his penthouse would gnaw at him in a way he never admitted out loud. For years, he had told himself he had done the right thing in pushing Sophia away, in refusing the responsibility of fatherhood. He had buried the memory of that night under layers of work and luxury, convincing himself that emotions were liabilities, that he was better off without them. But as time wore on, the emptiness inside him became harder to ignore. He often found himself lying awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling as a question circled in his mind like a predator. What if she had kept the baby? He would picture a child with his blonde hair and blue eyes, running through a playground, laughing without reserve. Sometimes he wondered if the child would have Sophia's features instead, her soft smile, or the way her blue eyes seemed to see right through him. The thoughts tormented him, filling his nights with an ache he couldn't dull with whiskey or fleeting company. The women who came and went from his life were nothing but distractions. They admired his wealth, his power, the thrill of being near a man the world adored, but they never saw past the surface. They didn't ask about his sleepless nights or the heaviness in his eyes when he stared out at the city. He played his part, charming them with effortless smiles and lavish gestures, but none of them ever touched the empty part of him that Sophia once had. He had believed he could close the chapter on her with a single sentence, yet her memory lingered in the smallest details. The scent of rain on the pavement would remind him of afternoons they had walked together. A stray laugh on the street might make him think he heard her voice, and occasionally he would see a flash of brown hair in a crowd, and his heart would stop before reality came crashing back. 5 years after Sophia's departure, the weight of his decision became unbearable. He found himself scanning faces in public places without realizing it, as if searching for something he told himself he didn't want. His pride insisted he had been right to protect his empire, that love and family were chains that would have destroyed everything he had worked for. But his heart, the part he refused to listen to, whispered that he had thrown away the only thing that could have given his life meaning. He plunged deeper into work, acquiring companies, expanding his influence, filling his calendar with endless obligations. But even the thrill of victory had dulled. The accomplishments that once gave him a high now felt hollow, and the applause from investors rang hollow in his ears. It all came to a breaking point one afternoon as he walked into a grand hotel in Manhattan, preparing for a dinner with prospective partners. The lobby buzzed with elegant guests and the hum of quiet conversations. He was running numbers in his head when his eyes landed on a figure across the room. For an instant, he thought he was imagining her, conjuring her ghost from years of regret. But the longer he looked, the more certain he was. Sophia was there, her hair a little longer, her posture strong, her expression calm, yet guarded. Time had touched her, but it hadn't diminished her, and she moved with a quiet dignity that made her even more striking than before. At her side was a little girl, no older than 5, with blonde hair that shone under the lights and eyes as blue as his. She was laughing, her small hand gripping Sophia's, her voice carrying across the lobby like a melody. Matthew felt the floor shift beneath him as the truth hit him with brutal clarity. The little girl was his. There was no denying the resemblance, no way to comfort himself with coincidence. He saw himself in her features, in her bright gaze, in the way she tilted her chin when she looked around with curiosity. His chest seized up, and for the first time in years, Matthew Anderson, the man who could command entire industries, felt powerless. The deal he had come to close no longer mattered. The chatter of the lobby faded into a dull murmur as he stood rooted in place, unable to move, unable to breathe. His heart hammered with a mixture of awe and devastation, because standing in front of him was the life he had once rejected, the family he had chosen to abandon. He had missed her first steps, her first words, every milestone that should have been his to share. And now, in the most ordinary of places, fate had opened the wound he had tried so hard to bury, forcing him to see the truth he had spent years denying. Sophia had built a life without him, and he was nothing but a stranger looking at his own daughter for the very first time. The power of regret. Matthew stood frozen in the middle of the hotel lobby, his breath caught somewhere between his chest and his throat, his entire body tensed, as if one false move would shatter the fragile moment in front of him. Sophia's laughter, soft but contained, reached his ears, and the sight of the little girl clutching her hand made his heart pound in a way he had never known. He wanted to run to them, to speak, to close the distance and claim what was undeniably his, yet his legs felt like lead. For years, he had convinced himself his decision had been final, that he had locked the door forever. Now the door was wide open, and what lay on the other side was not just a woman from his past, but a daughter who carried his very blood in her veins. He forced himself to move, each step slow, deliberate, as if he were approaching a dream that might vanish if he rushed. Sophia noticed him before he reached them. Her eyes, those penetrating blue eyes he once thought would haunt him forever, locked onto his, and the warmth he so vividly remembered was gone. In its place was a sharpness, a shield forged from years of pain and survival. Her body tensed, her hand protectively tightening around the little girl's fingers, pulling her slightly behind her as if instinctively she were protecting her. Matthew stopped a few feet away, suddenly aware of how out of place he looked in his tailored suit. A man who belonged in boardrooms and on magazine covers, standing in front of the very life he had once declared he wasn't ready to embrace. "Sophia," he said, his voice low and raspy, stripped of the authoritative tone that used to fill conference rooms and silence opposition. He hadn't spoken her name aloud in years, and the sound of it almost undid him. "Matthew," she replied evenly, her tone devoid of surprise. It was as if she had always known this day would come, as if she had prepared herself for the possibility of their paths crossing. But there was no warmth in her voice, no longing, just a cool acknowledgement, as if he were nothing but an acquaintance she would prefer to avoid. His eyes landed on the little girl, who was staring at him with curiosity from behind her mother. Her blonde hair shone under the lobby lights. Her small face was radiant with innocence, and those bright blue eyes, his eyes, were studying him with open curiosity. The sight of it hit him harder than any defeat he had ever faced. For a moment, he couldn't breathe, couldn't think, because here was the proof of everything he had thrown away. "She's yours," Sophia said softly, her voice quiet but cutting, as if she had taken the words from his chest before he could find the courage to ask. There was no accusation in her tone, just facts, cold and undeniable. Matthew swallowed hard, his throat dry, his heart pounding. "She's beautiful," he whispered, his voice shaking with an emotion he could barely contain. Sophia straightened, her chin lifting slightly as her daughter gripped her hand tighter. "She's mine," she corrected him firmly, her eyes locked with his in a mix of strength and pain. "She always has been mine." The little girl tugged on Sophia's hand and looked up at her with wide eyes. "Mommy, who is he?" she asked innocently. The question cut through Matthew like a knife. He wanted to kneel down, to tell her the truth, to hold her and whisper that he was her father, that he had made mistakes, but he was here now, ready to make things right. But Sophia's gaze warned him off, her protective posture a silent declaration that she wouldn't allow him to invade so easily. Matthew's composure cracked. He had spent years perfecting the art of control, but now his emotions were spilling out with every word. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice raw. "I was wrong." He wanted to say more, to beg for forgiveness, to explain the fear that had driven him to push her away, but the weight of her gaze silenced him. Sophia took a deep breath, her grip on her daughter unwavering. "Regret doesn't change the past," she said, her tone sharp but not cruel. "Regret doesn't fade 5 years of nights I spent alone, 5 years of raising her with no help, 5 years of watching her grow and wondering if I was wrong to ever love you. You can't just walk back in." Her words hit him with a brutal force, more painful than any defeat in a boardroom, more devastating than any public failure. He wanted to argue, to plead, but a look at her face told him it would be useless. She had built her world without him, and she would defend it with everything she had. The little girl shifted on her feet, her small fingers brushing against Sophia's leg, and Matthew felt the ache deepen, because he was a stranger in the life that should have been his. Sophia turned slightly, guiding her daughter toward the exit. She paused for just an instant, her eyes meeting his one last time. In them, he saw pain, strength, and a wall he wasn't sure he could ever break through. Without another word, she walked away, her daughter's blonde head bobbing at her side, and Matthew was left standing in place, watching as the family he had once rejected vanished through the glass doors. The noise of the lobby rushed back in all at once, the clinking of glasses, the hum of conversations. But Matthew heard none of it. He had built an empire, commanded fortunes, and shaped industries. Yet in that moment, he realized he was completely powerless. He had lost something no amount of money could ever buy back, something more valuable than all the contracts and titles in the world. As the doors closed behind Sophia and the little girl, a hollow ache consumed him, one that whispered a truth he could no longer deny. He would give everything, his company, his wealth, his reputation, just for a chance to be a part of their lives. The long road to redemption. Matthew left the hotel that afternoon with the image of Sophia and the little girl so deeply etched into his mind, he couldn't think of anything else. His car waited outside, sleek and black as always. But as he sank into the leather seat, he barely registered the driver asking him where to go. He gave no answer, for he no longer knew. For years, his path had been straight and clear: grow the empire, crush competitors, and climb higher and higher until there was nothing above him. But now, a fleeting encounter had broken that path in two. He leaned back, his head against the seat, and all he could see was the way the little girl had looked at him with curious eyes, the same eyes that stared back at him from the mirror every morning. His daughter. He had denied her existence for 5 years, but in that moment, there was no more denying the truth. The next few days were a blur, though his outer life continued at its usual pace. He sat in meetings where executives presented figures and strategies, but he heard none of it. He signed contracts without truly reading them, his hand moving on autopilot, while his mind drifted to thoughts of Sophia carrying their daughter alone, of her rocking her to sleep without him, of her teaching her little girl to walk, to talk, to laugh. He had missed it all. Every milestone, every first word, every scraped knee, and every bedtime story. The realization crushed him with a weight unlike any he had ever carried. For the first time in his life, victory tasted like ashes, and even the applause from shareholders felt like a mockery. He found himself staring out of windows for long periods, his reflection looking back at him hollow and tired, wondering how he had let fear steal what truly mattered. At night, the silence of his penthouse became unbearable. It had once been a place of power, a sanctuary where he celebrated victories and planned his next conquest. Now it was a cavern of echoes. He would pour himself drink after drink, but no amount of whiskey could silence the memory of his daughter's face. He saw her everywhere, in the blue of the sky, in the sound of children's laughter on the street, in the innocence he had once believed himself too hardened to deserve. He also thought of Sophia, the strength in her gaze, the way she had stood tall in the hotel lobby, shielding their daughter from him with a single look. He couldn't blame her. She had every right to hate him, every right to deny him. But he couldn't leave this time, not when he had seen what he had lost. On the third night, unable to take it anymore, he sat at his desk and wrote a letter. The words didn't come easily. He was a man accustomed to speeches that convinced investors to part with millions, to strategies that bent industries to his will. But this was different. Every sentence felt clumsy, inadequate, stripped of the power he wielded in every other sphere. He told her he was sorry, though he knew apologies meant little after years of absence. He confessed that he had been afraid, that his pride and ambition had blinded him, that he had chosen control over love and had lived to regret it. He didn't ask for anything, not forgiveness, not a second chance, only the opportunity to meet his daughter, to hear her voice, to let her know she had a father, even if she could never accept him. When the letter was finished, he stared at it for hours before sealing it and sending it, with no certainty that she would even read it. Sophia did read it. She sat at her kitchen table late one night after tucking Lily into bed, her hands trembling as she unfolded the pages. Her eyes skimmed the words, her heart tightening with every line. A part of her wanted to tear it up immediately, to throw it away and shut the door on him once and for all. But another part of her, the part that still remembered the man she had once loved, the part that couldn't deny the truth of his regret, made her stop. She tucked the letter away in a drawer, telling herself it meant nothing, yet she found herself rereading it the next night and the night after that. Matthew, for his part, waited. Each day he checked his phone compulsively, hoping for a reply that never came. He stayed near the school where Lily was enrolled, careful not to intrude, but desperate for even a glimpse of her face. He would see her skipping out of the building with her backpack, laughing with her friends, her hair catching the sunlight just as his had once done. It pained him to stay at a distance, but he knew Sophia would never forgive him if he overstepped. Still, he couldn't help but be there, hoping she would notice him one day and realize he wasn't going away. Weeks turned into months, and the emptiness in his life became unbearable. He no longer cared about quarterly reports or market expansions. Those victories felt trivial compared to the sound of his daughter's laughter as she ran past on the sidewalk, oblivious to who he was. One afternoon, unable to restrain himself, he approached as Sophia was picking Lily up. His voice shook as he said her name, and when she turned, her eyes were colder than the sharpest blade. He told her he wasn't there to bother, not to take anything away, only to ask for a chance. He pleaded with her to let him know his daughter, even from a distance, even just for a few moments. He admitted he would give everything, his company, his wealth, his reputation, just to hear Lily call him daddy once in his life. Sophia said nothing at first. She just stared at him, her expression unreadable, her arm wrapped protectively around her daughter. Then she shook her head slowly, her lips pressed into a thin line. "You made your choice, Matthew," she said finally, her voice low but firm. "And we learned to live without you." She walked away before he could respond, leaving him alone on the sidewalk, the city lights blurring behind his tears. That night, Matthew realized he was no longer the man who had once pushed her away with cold indifference. He was a man broken, stripped of everything but regret and longing. And for the first time in his life, he understood that there were some battles he couldn't win with power, some losses he could never buy back. If he wanted a place in his daughter's life, he would have to prove his worth not with words or wealth, but with patience, humility, and the one thing he had always been too afraid to give: his heart, forgiveness, and family. Matthew took Sophia's words as both a sentence and a lifeline. Consistency and patience, two things he had never mastered in his personal life, became his daily practice. He began to show up in ways that even he was surprised by. Every morning, before the first board meeting, he would stop by the school just to see Lily skipping through the doors with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. He never intruded. He never called out to her. But the sight of it gave him a strength that market reports and stock quotes never could. In the afternoons, when Sophia would allow it, he would drive them both to the park, where he would sit cross-legged in the grass, his once perfectly tailored suit swapped for rolled-up sleeves and scuffed shoes. He discovered his daughter's favorite game was to challenge him to endless races across the field, and though his lungs burned and his legs ached, he never let her down. Sophia remained cautious, watching him closely, her arms often crossed, as if to remind herself of the wall she had built. Yet she couldn't deny the transformation taking place before her eyes. The man who once told her he wasn't ready to be a father now sat patiently at Lily's tea parties, sipping imaginary cups and pretending that plastic cupcakes were gourmet meals. He would read stories in a voice that would waver when the words touched something deep inside him, and he would let Lily climb into his lap with total abandon, his hands steady and protective. More than once, Sophia caught herself watching him when he wasn't looking, amazed by how natural he seemed, how different he was from the sophisticated, arrogant figure she remembered from years ago. One evening, after a long day, Lily fell asleep in the back seat of Sophia's car as they drove home. Matthew had been with them at the park, and when Sophia pulled up to her apartment, he insisted on carrying the little girl upstairs. Sophia hesitated, but finally allowed it. She walked behind him as he carried their daughter, her head resting on his shoulder, her arms loose around his neck. For a moment, Sophia felt as if she were seeing a life that could have been theirs all along, a picture of the family they could have been if he had only chosen differently. The thought both comforted and broke her at the same time. Later that night, after Lily was tucked into her bed, Sophia found herself alone with Matthew in the quiet living room. The air between them was heavy with unspoken words. He broke the silence first, his voice low and raw. He told her he had spent years convincing himself that wealth and power were enough, that he had been a fool to believe that love was a weakness. He admitted that the night he told her he wasn't ready had been the worst mistake of his life, one that haunted him every single day since. He said he didn't deserve her forgiveness, but he would spend the rest of his life trying to show her, and Lily, that he wasn't the man she had once known. Sophia listened, her arms crossed, her heart torn between the memory of the betrayal and the undeniable truth of the man sitting in front of her now. When he was done, she looked at him for a long time, her blue eyes searching his, and she whispered words that surprised them both. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said softly, "but I can no longer deny what I see. You are here, and you are different, and she needs you. Maybe. So do I." Matthew's breath hitched, his heart pounding with a fragile hope he hadn't dared to believe in. He reached out, hesitating, giving her every chance to pull away. But when her hand finally met his, the weight of the years lifted in an instant. It wasn't a full forgiveness, not yet, but it was the beginning of something new, fragile and real. In the weeks that followed, their lives began to slowly knit together. Sophia allowed Matthew into more of their daily routines, letting him pick Lily up from school, letting him help with meals, letting him be there for both the mundane and the extraordinary moments. Lily, bright and perceptive, accepted him without question, her innocence untainted by the pain that had passed between her parents. To her, he was now simply Daddy, and the way she said it the first time made Matthew fall to his knees, tears streaming down his face as he held her tight. For Sophia, the journey was slower, more cautious. She wore her scars too deeply to let them go overnight. Yet every day that Matthew showed up, every smile he gave their daughter, every act of quiet devotion chipped away at the walls she had built. She found herself laughing again in his presence. She found herself remembering the man she had once fallen for, and she realized that maybe he had been buried all along, waiting for the moment he would be forced to resurface. The story of Matthew Anderson, the millionaire CEO who once declared he wasn't ready to be a father, became something of a whispered legend, even among those who had only known him as a ruthless businessman. To the world, he had surprised them all by stepping away from certain deals, by skipping important meetings, by choosing to spend time with his daughter instead of endless ambition. But to Sophia and Lily, he was simply theirs, a man who had fallen, who had broken, who had lost everything that mattered, and who had finally found his redemption not in power, but in love. And though the scars of the past would never fully disappear, they were no longer chains. They were reminders of how far they had come, and how precious their fragile, beautiful second chance was.